my big face and a pro-life review of 2021. What happened then and what happens now. So this is the loose kind of topic I was given. I love loose and vague because then you can literally take it anywhere. So we're talking about building a culture of life. What happened in 2021? Let's roll into it. All right, so what happened in Canada? I'm just going to get rid of the sidebar here if I can. Voila. All right. Y'all can still see my screen? Hello?
Yes, we can all see your screen. Sorry.
Okay, cool. All right. So I didn't include everything that happened in Canada pro-life wise because then we would be here forever. But we're going to start with Bill C3 because very few people talked about this bill. It was basically brought into the House and then rushed right through. It had unanimous consent. There weren't even votes that were acknowledged or recorded because it was just slammed right through. But the bill states every person commits an offense who engages in any conduct with the intent to provoke a state of fear in a person in order to impede them from obtaining health services from a health professional. Now, this is basically a federalized version of what we call bubble zone bans that have happened in Alberta, now in Saskatchewan too, which we'll get to. But all throughout the country, these bubble zones are popping up. I remember walking from my previous home in Ottawa, downtown Ottawa, to Parliament Hill, and there was this one abortion facility actually where Morgentaler used to work. And if you know Morgentaler, he's the one who took the abortion case to the Supreme Court, and that's why we now have no abortion law in Canada. That aside, I would walk past this abortion facility every day and there would be a bubble zone. So nobody could come within 50 meters, sometimes 150 meters, depending on where you are in the country. And you could not advocate for free speech, which is ridiculous, but you also couldn't advocate for the pro-life position or provide information to women going into the abortion facility. So this is basically a Canada-wide bubble zone ban on free speech with regards to, as the bill states, intending to provoke fear in a person. So it's very, very vague language. If you deal within the realm of policy, you will understand that this is brutal language because it's not specific, it's not tight, it's very open. So in this bill, basically, not politicians, bad politicians created it, but police officers will get to determine if you were actually your intent, which is dangerous. So if you were advocating outside of a hospital or outside of an abortion facility or a euthanasia center, then a doctor could literally be walking across the street and say that you instilled fear into them and they no longer wanted to perform an abortion. Or a woman even thinking about ordering abortion pills online. Well, does that mean that she then saw someone advocating the pro-life position and she felt fear? And so she didn't get the abortion pills or she didn't go into an abortion facility. So it's very loose language, but nonetheless, this is something we have to look out for. But it also, which was super weird, it's such a weird bill. It also basically gives, I think it was 10 days of paid leave to federal employees. And then a Conservative member of Parliament lumped in this secondary portion here, which says it would also give unpaid bereavement leave to parents who face a stillbirth or the death of a child. So it's really weird. Like we have no abortion law in Canada, and yet we still recognize that if a parent, mom or dad, loses a child, that there's actually grieving involved, especially with the stillbirth. So, I mean, there's different countries in I think it was Sweden and or Norway, where you could actually have an abortion and then you are given paid leave for a period of time. So it's really bizarre, but we see this kind of European style of policy coming into Canada through Bill C3. And then we saw a great bill, a private member's bill, C233, the Sex Selective Abortion Act. To your left of the pictures, that is MP Kathy Wagenthal. And we really appreciated actually this bill because we got to see where people really stood in the House of Commons. We saw an outpour of support on university campuses actually in support of this bill from more leftist or more feminist groups, which was really, really cool to see. I actually got to host an event with MP Wagenthal at the United Nations last year, and we got to include this talking point of her sex-selective abortion act. It was unfortunately defeated, but nonetheless, it takes a lot of bravery actually. After working on the Hill, you see almost the brutality of what MPs face from people who say publicly they are pro-life and yet behind closed doors attack those presenting pro-life bills. So I applaud her for this, and she's going to continue on doing the similar kind of acts, presenting different bills like this. So then another thing we saw was the pregnancy resource centers. Prime Minister Trudeau promised in the 2021 election that if reelected, his government would no longer provide charitable status to anti-abortion organizations, for example, crisis pregnancy centers that provide dishonest counseling to women about their rights and the options available to them at all stages of the pregnancy. This is ridiculous, to say the least. We saw a couple of years ago, actually, the Canada Summer Jobs funding for students, that if an organization wanted to get funds from the government to fund a student for the summer, then they had to sign an attestation saying that they agree with basically the Liberal Party position on abortion, which is it should be available at any time for anyone. So the fact that pregnancy resource centers are being targeted now is something to watch. It's something to start talking about also in the general public, online with your friends, with your family, about the necessity of them in our communities, because they not only help women, but they also help the family, which then helps the community at large. So something to watch out for there. I actually don't know how his party, Trudeau's party, will feel about that specifically, because there are various Liberals who have actually benefited from pregnancy resource centers, their families and elsewhere. So on the right here, you see MP Leslyn Lewis. She's a newer member of parliament. She ran in the former Conservative Party leadership race where Aaron O'Toole got dubbed the party leader, and now he has been fired from that position as of yesterday. Thank the Lord. We will get to that in the Q&A. Nonetheless, she and Kathy both stood up at the Hill, and Leslyn actually in the House of Commons about 2 days ago, and defended pregnancy resource centers. So again, lots of attention coming to this, and we'll see what happens there. Next, because we are talking to Saskatchewanians, I wanted to bring up the University of Saskatchewan and Dr. Carrie Lavender. By show of hands, I'm going to open this up again. By show of hands, who here has heard of Dr. Lavender? Just kind of ish. Okay, all right, fair enough. Well, I'm glad that I'm bringing her up then. All right, so she's the assistant professor of biochemistry, microbiology, and immunology at the College of Medicine at the U of S. So through her research, the Canadian Institute, or because of her research rather, the Canadian Institutes of Health Research ended up giving 2 grants, very lofty sums, to Dr. Lavender, and Canadians' tax dollars actually funded the creation of humanized mice. So this has been a big story down south in the United States, but in Canada, it's not really talked about. So it's interesting because Lavender used to work for the NIH in the United States and California, and that is under Dr. Anthony Fauci. Surprise, surprise. And there she developed the humanized mouse model, but due to President Trump's ban on fetal research with regards to utilizing aborted babies, Lavender ended up taking the mice to Saskatoon, where she continues to do research on mice. Now, what's interesting, she has over 150 humanized mouse models at this point. What we have to understand is she takes a piece of an aborted child's lung, and grafts it onto the back of a mouse. And then they utilize that mouse for research. So at this point in time, they're utilizing it for COVID-19 research to develop a pill or a therapeutic. They're doing several different types of experiments on these mice. Now, if you're going to create a humanized mouse, what do you need? You need that aborted child. So, and you have to have good lung tissue. So it has to be fresh. And so I am digging into this a little bit more. I don't know where she's procuring these aborted children's lungs from, but when we find out, we will let you know. But nonetheless, she started with the mouse models in California with aborted children from the United States, but is continuing her research at the U of S. So something to keep your eye on, especially as university students in a pro-life club. And we're going to jump to Bill 48. This was like this kind of legislation pushed through the legislature. It was insane. There was a couple of private meetings that I was a part of, and I talked with some MLAs in Saskatchewan about this bill, but it's called the Public Health or Safe Access to Hospitals Amendment Act of 2021. And it would create a so-called safe access zone of 50 meters around a hospital property in which any non-union protests will be prohibited. So they basically brought this in under the guise of people are protesting COVID-19, they're protesting the vax, they're protesting mandates, doctors and nurses, hospital staff are getting fired en masse because of various reasons. So people who are not in a union can no longer go and exercise their ability, their freedom to speech. So it's interesting because alongside the non-union protests in the bill, they also include specific language of anti-abortion protests. So very fascinating, but the bill, even though it was passed in November, the law has a sunset clause, thank God. If any of you are aspiring to go into government or policy creation, or you're just reading over a piece of legislation in general that is far-reaching into impeding or invading our rights and freedoms, make sure you look for the word a sunset clause, because this specific amendment will expire in 2 years and will be revisited by the government to determine whether or not it should be remaining in place or if it should just be thrown into the dustbin of history. So we will pray that it goes into the dustbin, but nonetheless, this is the current reality of Saskatchewan. You can no longer go and advocate like the life chains that happen all across the country. You no longer can go and have those outside of a hospital within 50 meters. In Saskatoon specifically, I reached out to the local Campaign Life Coalition group there, and their life chain last year at the tail end, had saved one child through being there one day, a Sunday. I believe it was a Sunday anyway. Yes, it was a Sunday. And they saved a child from being aborted. So this is an anti-abortion law, pro-abortion law. You could label it as that. And it's something to look out for, but nonetheless, I don't think this is going to stop people from advocating for the pro-life position. You know, you just got to stay within the safe access zone. All right, we'll move on. New Brunswick. This one's interesting. So Trudeau held back roughly $140,000 of New Brunswick's federal health transfer money. It slammed the province for not funding abortion at the Fredericton Clinic, and said that it was making it difficult to access abortion. So what we're talking about here, Trudeau during the election, or right before the election rather, was very, very upset with New Brunswick's premier because he would not take taxpayers' dollars and fund a private abortion clinic. There are 3 hospitals in New Brunswick, the tiny province of New Brunswick, that you can go and get an abortion at, and it's taxpayer funded. So what this premier has been doing is actually standing up against funding a private abortion facility, to which all of us agree with. But the fact that Trudeau, he has made basically, well, we'll read the next paragraph. The Liberal government has pledged $366,000 in 2021 for the research to study abortion access in the province. And my personal belief is that they were hoping to equip pro-abortion advocates, because the advocates way out east are quite something. From Ontario onwards, they're vicious. So I think they were wanting to equip them to make the case for why a clinic is actually needed in the provincial capital, on top of everything else going on within that election with regards to abortion. So they want private facilities, both euthanasia facilities, abortion facilities, to be fully funded, whether private or public. So this is something else to look for in the future if this is actually going to happen. And New Brunswick, I'm taking it New Brunswick is going to be like this clincher. Like it's a clincher moment right now where if they choose and they buckle to end up funding this private facility, abortion facility, then that could mean that will happen across the board. This will just be the status quo from here on out. But they have not made that decision right now. So we will pray that this will remain in place and they will stand their ground. I say kudos to the New Brunswick Premier. He's doing a good job, aside from, supporting abortion. All right, United States. Good old US. So I wanted to throw up this wonderful article title because it talks to something that I've been speaking about for a long time. And that the article title is "Abortion Rights Are Under Attack in the United States. Should we in Canada be worried?" And I say, yes, you should be worried, pro-abortion Canadians. If United States ends up seeing the overturn of Roe versus Wade, that will affect the culture, that'll affect the political dynamic, that will affect the free flow of information, or not the free flow, the flowing of information into Canada as to what's almost acceptable in the pro-life sphere pro-abortion sphere as to what government should do with regards to the issue. So just wanted to throw that in there because if the other side is already throwing around this kind of language in the media, they know something is coming down the pike and it's something to keep note of. So let's jump down. In 2021, there were 19 state legislatures that passed 106 pro-life laws. Pretty darn impressive. The Guttmacher Institute, which for anybody who doesn't know, they used to be the research arm of Planned Parenthood. They stated in their analysis of 2021 that this year beat all other years of new pro-life laws. The next highest year in percentages of pro-life laws being passed was 2011, with 89 pro-life laws passed. So what you're seeing here, the steep increase in pro-life laws on the state level, even actually, I didn't include it in here, but I was just thinking of it now, even on the local level in the United States with the sanctuary cities, where there's various cities primarily located in Texas, but they're spreading out like in Ohio and elsewhere, where their city councils are saying no abortion is allowed to take place within the city limits, or anybody committing them will face penalties. But what they're doing on the state level is preparing for the overturn of Roe versus Wade, because the writing is on the wall. There have been Supreme Court cases, like the next one we'll talk about a little bit, but they're seeing that it's under attack, and the stability of it, well, it's not stable. It's on life support, for lack of a better term. But this is why you're seeing a steep incline, because once what Roe versus Wade did, in the most simplistic of terms and ways, is it basically legalized abortion, forced states to legalize abortion all across the US. So if it's rescinded, stripped away, then you're going to be left, the states are going to be able to make their own determinations as to abortion laws. And that's why you're seeing so many pro-life laws passed, because they're basically bolstering, while they have different individuals in charge of the states, governors, and other politicians, they want to utilize this moment so that when it's rescinded, they can immediately go, different states anyway can, into full-on abortion bans. So the next thing we saw in the US was the SCOTUS case of Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization. Now, if this law were to be upheld, it's a Mississippi law, it's about a 15-week abortion ban law that got thrown to one court and then got sent to a circuit court, and then it got sent all the way to into the Supreme Court. But if this law is upheld, whether fully or partially, it could allow for states to enforce abortion restrictions before viability, so before the child could survive outside the womb. And this would be for the first time since the Roe versus Wade decision. It's something to watch because in December, the Supreme Court had oral arguments. So people came and presented their case for or against this specific case. And we will hear about the decision on this case in June of this year, 2022. So it's something to look for because it strikes at part of Roe versus Wade. Now, this will not overturn Roe versus Wade, but it's something that will chip significantly away at it, because you can get an abortion constitutionally, but not through Roe versus Wade based upon viability. Up until a child is viable, that's when you can get an abortion in Roe versus Wade. But we're here in 2022, and I just read a story about a 21-week-old child surviving outside the womb, whereas in Roe versus Wade, viability was deemed as being 28 weeks. So we've come a long way in science and technology, and we know that children younger and younger, as healthcare continues to improve, as the pro-life movement gets bigger, pregnancy centers get spread out across the country, we're going to see Roe versus Wade become more and more of a piece of trash that needs to be thrown away, and the states be self-determinant in abortion laws. All right, the Texas Heartbeat Act. So this is a heartbeat bill in Texas that was passed. And then President Joe Biden really hated this bill, because if a child has a detectable heartbeat in Texas, they cannot be aborted. So he took issue with this, threw it over to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court upheld the law. So since this Heartbeat Act, that means, for anybody who doesn't know, that means that it is still in place and still fully functioning. It is open, however, this Heartbeat Act is actually still open to legal challenges. It won't go back to the Supreme Court. So this is actually a really good thing, because there's been a lot of heartbeat bills passed and then rescinded or challenged in a court and then defeated. So this one stands. It was really, really well crafted. I'm really proud of the lawyers behind this bill. They did a fantastic job. So also, interestingly enough, there's been a 51% decrease in abortions in Texas. And just since, I think it was this January, it climbed up to a 66% decrease in abortions obtained in Texas since this heartbeat bill got passed and implemented. So life is winning. Life is winning, whether the media tells you or not. We'll look over at North Dakota. They also passed legislation which said any institution, like a school, that enters into a contract with a person that performs or promotes the performance of abortion would have its operating budget cut by 2.5%, which is quite significant when you look at the grand scale of how much tax dollars are funneled into public schools. The school official signing the contract would also face a misdemeanor charge, punishable, my words are like word salad tonight, by up to 30 days in jail and a $1,500 fine. So this is something that I'm really excited about because of the number of schools that have abortion promotion within them, from kindergarten all the way through grade 12. We see it in the curriculum. If you want to look at it on your own time, you can look up something called comprehensive sexuality education. I talk about it a lot, and it's heavily promoting abortion. But then you also have groups like Planned Parenthood, the larger providers of sex education in the United States, in our kids' schools. They also would not be permitted unless a school wanted to face certain penalties. Next, we saw Joe Biden, good old Joe, adopted an executive order directing U.S. diplomats to promote abortion at the United Nations. and has been inserting abortion funding into seemingly unrelated parts of his legislative agenda. For example, a massive $1.9 trillion COVID-19 relief package contained nearly $459 billion directed, specifically earmarked for abortion. So the more we look at, we'll get into the UN in a little bit, but the more you look at these ridiculous spending packages, whether in Canada, United States, kind of happening elsewhere in Europe too, COVID or any kind of fascination by the general populace at the moment, or like Black Lives Matter was another one. Different bills being passed at those times or at this time with COVID-19, there's a lot of other additional spending happening within them that have nothing to do with the actual title of the fiscal package being presented. So keep an eye out for that. This is going to be interesting to watch with regards to the funding and promotion of abortion at the same time as so many states are rejecting abortion in practice and in promotion. So I don't know necessarily, like, unless a bunch of Planned Parenthood employees are getting huge benefits, I don't know necessarily where this money is going to go towards, but we will see. We will see who in the pro-abortion movement really flourishes now that they have an influx of funds from taxpayers. But nonetheless, keep an eye out for that. Next. Okay, we've talked about a lot of like negative stuff. I wanted to bring to you an example of a fantastic country who is kind of getting it really, really right, and that is Hungary. So this on your, I think it's your left, I'm not really sure on the screen, but is Katalin Novak. She's the Hungarian Minister of Families. She just stepped down from the position, and she's running to be the head honcho of Hungary. But she did some really key things, holistic things for the country of Hungary to promote life. And we will read, to incentivize families, a law was enacted that allows working Hungarian women who have 4 children to pay no income taxes for life. The law also allows 3 years of family leave to care for babies. Couples may also receive a $30,000 interest-free loan to help buy a home. Repayment goes down with each child, and after 3 children, the debt is forgiven. Kind of really great incentives, and these are literally just 2 things that they did in Hungary. And when we're approaching a pro-life position, we have to understand, why is a woman obtaining an abortion, whether married or single, her age, a lot of times it's fiscal, like pregnancy resource centers, why do they exist? And then you can directly target the reason why they exist with a good policy like they're doing here, that's proactive in not just attacking abortion, but also promoting the family, which promotes good familial structure, good community structure, which then means abortions are going to go down because there are 2 parents in the home, and we could go on and on there. But since these policies were enacted, the birth rate has actually risen, which was one of their targets within the country. Hungary is a small country, and this was a plus for them. Marriages are up by 83%. That's significant. And the divorce rate is at a 60-year low. Again, data has come in, it's proven. Children in 2-parent homes with a mother and a father, girls specifically, we'll talk about girls here, they are less promiscuous, which means they're not going to be sexually active, which means less abortions, which means they're going to get married. They're like, it's a trickle down system. And then also for boys, they'll see how a husband treats his wife, and therefore how healthy masculinity can be developed, how to lead a home, how to be a good community member, etc., and how to take personal responsibility. So we look here, because of these laws, abortion has also dropped by 41%. Significant. So if you want a good case study, go look at the pro-life, pro-family laws of Hungary. They're doing it right. And interestingly enough, before we jump into this one, when I was at the UN Commission on Population and Development, basically the Population Control Commission in 2021, it was funny because the EU was throwing a fit. EU nations really were so mad at Hungary and Poland specifically. They were the punching bags of the United Nations, different branches, different advocates who showed up at this huge commission, as well as different countries, primarily Scandinavian countries actually, were attacking Hungary and Poland. So you know they're getting something right when you got those people upset. So let's move on to South America. So in Mexico, the Mexican Supreme Court decriminalized abortion, a ruling that many expect will lead to the full legalization of abortion in the near future. So despite this ruling, legislation to fully legalize abortion was abandoned earlier in the year, with Mexico's president refusing to allow the pro-abortion legislation to receive a full vote in the legislature. So what this one Supreme Court case did in Mexico was legalized abortion in a state. And that's why they're looking at it as a case study for decriminalizing abortion all across Mexico. So something to watch out for this year. There's been a lot of activity around this issue within the country. And I'm not really sure how this is going to play out. I don't think we'll see decriminalization this year. But if there is a new president installed in the next, I don't remember when their next election is, but the next election will be very telling to see who's running and what their legislative agenda will be, because then they could possibly take this law that was established at their Supreme Court and run with it across the board. So next we'll move to Guatemala. This is a very positive case. The Guatemalan president declared his intentions to make Guatemala the pro-life capital of Latin America in December of last year. And he did this, very interestingly, while in the United States. He was snubbed by President Joe Biden of the US after he made this comment, and many others, about being very, very pro-life. He's very passionately pro-life. It's good to see. And he's also a doctor. So it's kind of a blessing, because all these experts or doctors who come and attack pro-life politicians, they don't have a chance against him. And it's really cool to see that in the media play out. Guatemala also revoked permission for Planned Parenthood Global to set up an office in the country, which is fantastic news. Now we move to China. China is so fascinating. So here you see an article titled, China allows 3 children in this new policy shift, and China scrapped its decades-old one-child policy in 2016, replacing it with a 2-child limit, which has failed to lead to a sustained upsurge in birth. So if you know, I actually will point you to an individual named Reggie Littlejohn. We met at the UN, fantastic woman. She is very bipartisan, and she goes into China, well, not herself anymore, she can't, she's banned, but she has an organization that goes into China and helps save preborn children. So she did this under the one-child policy, now 2-child. Now they've increased it. The Chinese Communist Party has increased it to 3 children. And they've done this because they messed with nature. And for the majority of the Chinese population, they chose under the one-child policy, and then even under the 2-child policy, to keep their male children and abort their female. And they primarily did this because they wanted to ensure almost their own future. And what I mean by that is the male children, even when they get married, will take care of their parents in the future. The daughter, if they have a daughter, she will be given over to her husband, and she will go be with her husband's family. Thus, her parents will not be taken care of. So this is why, part of the reason anyway, why so many people chose to have males. Now there's a crisis in the population. I think the last statistic that I saw was there was 7 males to every female in China. That's how brutal the kilter is off. So we're looking at this, and even under the 2-child policy, people were still choosing to have 2 males if possible, for almost like insurance purposes. So now that there's a 3-child policy, I'm still against it. It's interesting because in the country, in China, or throughout the region, Chinese feminists are actually speaking out against, even they were against the 1-child, 2-child, and now against the 3rd-child policy, saying that the government cannot regulate a woman's ovaries. So it's interesting to watch the comparison between the feminist movement in China and the feminist movement in North America, how they're using similar talking points, but not. It's fascinating. Nonetheless, let's move on. China and North Korea, United States, Canada, Vietnam, and South Korea are the only 6 countries that allow abortion on demand throughout the entirety of pregnancy. That's pretty shameful that Canada and United States are in there, but hopefully we'll see some movement on that someday, very soon. Overall, 69 nations permit elective abortions, and 58 of those countries restrict it after 14 weeks of gestation, just after the first trimester. So elective abortion, for anybody who doesn't know, I'm sure most of you do, but elective abortion, whenever they say that, it means that the abortion is not necessary. It's of your own free will, you want it, and so you're gonna get it. Move on. This is something to watch as well in the future. The Geneva Consensus Declaration was set up in 2020 under the previous US administration under Donald J. Trump, and it continues on as a coalition today. So I wanted to bring it up because we individuals like myself and others in my coalition, we utilize this document a lot now at the United Nations because, as it states, it serves as a rebuke to the United Nations and the World Health Organization, both of whom promote abortion. It talks about the strength of the family and of a successful and flourishing society. It talks about how the essential priority of protecting the right to life, and that in no case should abortion be promoted as a method of family planning. Very, very key things. I have sent this off to different individuals in university, and they've actually referred to it in papers that they've written, and they've been able to share it with profs, and then their families read it, and their fellow students read it, and people just everywhere are starting to read it more. Now that's becoming more well known. But I wanted to bring it up because Guatemala has just become in 2021 a signatory of the GCD, which is fantastic news because now we're up to 34 nations who have signed on and are working towards those goals, as well as the 4 pillars that I have listed down below in smaller print. Interestingly enough, Kenya and Uganda have been targeted by pro-life groups who have various nefarious streams of funding, and they are calling for these governments to withdraw from the GCD. They have not withdrawn, which is great news, and many other countries are also who are now signatories of the GCD are also under attack. But I wanted to bring up Kenya and Uganda in particular because it is extremely fierce what they're facing, and they're standing up to it. So I'm very proud of those 2 nations. And we move on to the UN, and my picture's not there, but whatever. The UN human rights experts, which we call rapporteurs, they're appointed by the UN to different portfolios with regards to human rights. So they told the US Supreme Court that upholding the Texas pro-life law, which we just talked about, that would violate international human rights law, which was extremely puzzling, mind-boggling actually, because they don't really intervene or take part in SCOTUS cases, but they did. And with regards to how an abortion ban at 6 weeks would violate international human rights, it doesn't. There is for anybody who ever says international human rights upholds or law upholds abortion, it doesn't. It upholds, on the contrary, every human being's right to life. So this was something that was interesting to see happen because UN experts who intervened, one of which was the woman who was appointed by the UN to the health rapporteur. And she is a former abortionist, surprise, surprise. So it's interesting because I think we'll see more of this possibly in the future, not just in the United States, but elsewhere in the world, where the Supreme Court of the land, wherever it may be, may make a ruling where they make the same kind of excuse that international law would be violated when in fact it's not being. So we'll see if this metastasizes into other nations. Next, we saw the US administration and the European Union blocked in trying to include controversial abortion-related terms and explicitly pro-abortion language in the annual agreement of the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women. Ugh, it's like a word salad. So under President Joe Biden, this administration has been very, very pro-abortion. The most pro-abortion administration. I mean, I got to work alongside the Trump administration at the United Nations, and they were decent. And various others in my coalition worked under President Bush, under Clinton, and they have never, ever witnessed such pro-abortion rhetoric in their life by the US administration. And the administration is also working alongside groups like the EU, but also voting blocs within Africa that tilt more towards, like South Africa, that tilt more towards the pro-abortion side, as well as Canada and various others. But thankfully, this language was kept out, and the significance of really pro-abort language being kept out of an annual agreement, as I stated here, or what we call a consensus document that's produced out of a commission or a conference at the UN, is significant to every country, actually, because countries will take what unelected bureaucrats decide as right, almost, in these consensus documents, and they'll take that as truth and they'll run with it in their own nations, creating bills and legislation and citing basically these UN documents as rationale or proof as to why running with a pro-abortion agenda is essential. So thankfully, that was blocked, and we came out with an okay document at the end of that feminist commission. The next commission is this March. We will see what happens there. Nobody knows this yet, so I'll let you in. I was actually just denied really from having an event at this commission coming up in March, which I am not so happy about, because we held one, like I said before, with Kathy Wagenthal last year. And they stated that the reason why we were denied our application is because our organization does not align with the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women values, nor does our event. So we might make a stink about that. So you might see a news story in the near future about that. But nonetheless, the UN is a joke at this point. But let's move on. African countries and the Russian Federation led the World Health Assembly to reject the term comprehensive sexuality education. This means any CSE programs sponsored by international agencies cannot be considered approved by the international community. So also super significant, because the United Nations, various branches of the UN, created the standard for sexuality education for the world's children. And it's called the International Technical Guidance on Comprehensive Sexuality Education. Again, a lot of words, but it's a really fascinating read as to what they want to push onto the world's children in their classrooms. And the fact that African countries and the Russian Federation actually worked together to fight this term of comprehensive sexuality education, which ties into pro-abortion language, and therefore our children being taught about being very promiscuous and also normalizing abortion. A lot of that was halted. So kudos to those two voting blocs. And with that, you can find me at any of those places. I can also, if you want to message me on here, I'm more than happy to give out my email. But if I give you my email, just don't give it to anyone else. So if you want to contact me with a private question, please do DM me and I will send that to you ASAP. But